Yeah, my name is Benz. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and I'm going to talk to you today about GitHub, open source, and DevOps. We're going to go through just some basics of DevOps, and then we're going to go through, well, let's get through the agenda actually. Just the basics of DevOps, and then we're going to go through some source control. I'm going to introduce you to Git and GitHub. I know a lot of people already know about Git and GitHub, but I'm going to just get everyone up to speed so we're all on the same page. And I will give you a few little things that you might actually not know about the difference between Git and GitHub, things like that. And then I'm going to talk briefly about using Microsoft Teams as a collaboration hub. And I'm going to wrap up with a demo of using Visual Studio Code, Microsoft Teams, and code sharing in Visual Studio Code to solve a little problem. So we get started with that. So today I'm showing an application which is on the web. You can see it at www.tailwindtraders.com. It is an application that it's basically a demo of a e-commerce website. That e-commerce website basically shows, different categories. It has a mobile app. It has all kinds of things. And in fact, I'm going to dive into the source code behind it, which is open source, in a second. But you can actually see how you can actually build this yourself. Huh, my cam seems to be, hold on a second. There it is. Okay. It was getting fuzzy there for a second. Was that just me or was that everybody? Probably everybody. Apologies for that. I don't know what happened there. Okay, so anyway, we're back. It's probably doing everyone a favor, actually, but never mind. Let's get back to work. Okay, so who is Tailwind Traders? It's a fictional company. Let's say they're experiencing rapid growth. They have different goals across teams, and they need better collaboration. They need a way to actually work together and make sure that they reduce problems with their software while they're making faster deliveries. And then they want to share tools as well. So what do you do to actually make that work? Okay, we're going to talk about DevOps, because DevOps is really a great way to help improve your performance and your reliability in any website. Everyone's probably heard of DevOps, but what actually is it? DevOps essentially accelerates delivery. This is a great quote from a colleague of mine, Donovan Brown. I like to start most presentations with this just because it covers pretty much everything. DevOps is a union of people, process, and products, and it enables continuous delivery of value to the end user. So you really have to focus on value as well for your end users when you're talking about this stuff. Because if you go through all the people training, you set up these great processes, and you buy all these products, and it doesn't really provide any value, there's no point in going to all that effort. So how do you actually set that up? So people, process, and products. Here's a typical software development lifecycle. You're going to plan, you're going to develop, you're going to deliver, and you're going to run operations, including monitoring, learning, and things like that. And you want to make sure if there's a feature in the planning phase, it gets all the way through the development phase, it's delivered the way it's expected, and that it actually does the job that was promised in the planning phase. And that's not always the case. And the way you actually make sure that things are delivered is through good DevOps processes, good products, and good people. The people have to understand what their role is in the process, and the process has to support those people. So each person needs to understand what they're supposed to do. The process is supposed to make it clear without any confusion that they can do it. And the product should enable the people in the process to do what you're supposed to do. And monitoring and learning, the operate phase there, is often overlooked because you're so busy planning, developing, and delivering. You don't necessarily have a lot of time for feedback or to make sure that the actual features that you delivered were delivered. And that's key. That's very key when you're working with any software. It's just funny that it's often the overlooked part. So if you have a good DevOps process, all four of those stages should be really well supported. Now, one way you can do that is with source control. We have Git and GitHub. And let's just look at a little bit of the key features, the components of a Git project. In this case, we've got code. Of course, everyone's familiar with code. We've also got a file called gitignore, branches, which actually allow you to create different versions of the software inside a single repo. And that means you can have a branch which is usually called main. That's your production branch. You can have another branch which is a staging branch or a testing branch, or just a single feature branch. So you might be just working on a single feature, and you can test that and you can run through it, and when you're done with the branch, you merge it into the main branch for simplicity's sake. Although you could keep separate branches in a repo indefinitely. You have commits as well. That changes, it tracks changes to artifacts. So when was something updated in a branch or anywhere else? And then you have tags, which can support a specific release. Now, one thing that is important to note, so when you're looking at Git clone is something that is part of the Git development. It's called Git is basically called officially a distributed version control system. Excuse me. And the idea is that it can run anywhere. It can run on your local machine. You can download it for Windows or Mac. But of course, we also have GitHub. So GitHub takes Git and makes it extended into a website that you can use to support your projects. So people, for example, always get confused a little. They get conflated between some features between Git and GitHub. In Git, you can clone. So you can clone something from a repo to your local machine. In GitHub, you can fork something. And that's because, and forking is similar to a clone, but you're taking it from one account and putting it in another account on GitHub. You're not making a clone on your local machine. So that's a good differentiator if anyone asks you, well, what's the difference between Git and GitHub? Well, GitHub is the place where you have a bunch of different people represented by accounts. You store code just like you do in a clone, but the code itself is not cloned in between accounts in GitHub, it's forked. And there's some good reasons for that, which we'll explore in a bit. The other thing that's great about GitHub is, of course, expertise sharing. You can put some code out there. It can be public. There's cross-team collaboration, so you can actually share things across a wide. A lot of people have a GitHub account, so pretty much everybody can say, what's your GitHub account, and give you access to my repo as an editor, or they can fork it and start working with it. Also, we have code spaces, which is a fairly new thing. Code spaces allows you to run a integrated development environment, an IDE, which is a subset of Visual Studio Code, which I'll describe in a minute, on a container in GitHub. So it's not running on your local machine, it's running out on the cloud. And the advantage of that is you can have pre-created and pre-approved images that your organization can work with. And we also have GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions are pre-made scripts. If you go to the GitHub Marketplace, just search for GitHub Marketplace, there are actions and extensions. And we'll talk about both a little bit. But let's dive into a GitHub project. So GitHub project has some important components. It doesn't have to have all of these, but these are things that should be included. README file, security, license, code owners file to define who's responsible for the code, so you can contact people or you know who's behind the actual repo. And then there's pull requests, issues, and releases. So let's actually just dive in. As I mentioned before, this is a Tailwind Traders website. If I go to GitHub, inside of GitHub, github.com/Microsoft/Tailwind Traders-website, this is the actual code for the website that you see there. Well, there's a README, and the README basically provides instructions on this code. And as you can see here, there's links to several repos which have different purposes working with this code. So you can actually recreate Tailwind Traders yourself. You can look at it at www.tailwindtraders.com, or you can actually just recreate it locally and play around with it. It has a lot of encapsulated best practices and use cases that you might want to check out. All right, the other thing in Tailwind Traders, this is our security And this is a standard Microsoft security.md. So MD is a markdown file, for those of you who might not know. And this is written in markdown. The security here is basically a boilerplate that we provide for most of our Microsoft products. In this case, there's a little blurb about how we take security seriously, how to report security issues, and a few other things here. There's also a policy section as well. The license, so the license file for this, it's an MIT license. As you can see here, it says short and simple. Here's the license. That's it. That's everything. It's basically, you can reuse this software. Now, the above copyright notice and permission notice should be included in all copies, meaning that everyone can trace where this actually came from. And then there's a disclaimer here about how it's provided. But there's several, when you set up a new repo, there's several licenses to choose from. This one particular one is the Tailwind Traders license, MIT. All right, so I mentioned issues before. So issues are things that you can do. These aren't necessarily sending code. This is just alerting people who create the repo that there are issues in the repo. And you can describe them in detail. Here's some issues for Tailwind Traders that have been closed. There's only 2 open, so that's pretty good. They're just, this one's just a suggestion. Create a request form for MS hosted backend, and default deployment options should be standalone. So there's all kinds of descriptions in there. So going beyond issues, if you find a problem and you actually have some code to fix it, you found the solution as well, you can post that here in pull requests. So you can create a version of this, a clone in general, or a fork, and then you actually create a pull request, which is shared with the original creators of the software. Some of these pull requests have been merged, and some have not. Here's one that's been merged. I can tell by the little icon here, and some are outstanding. And in this case, anything that's open has this, the red icon like that, and then the merged icon means, for example, add Azure Communication Services demo with some code that was provided by Borja Garcia, and that was actually merged into the main branch of the software. So speaking of branches, the main branch is here, updated 5 days ago. Here's some active branches. So these are branches of things that we're working on, or that the developers of this software are working on, that is separate and outside of the main branch. And this is something that might be testing, might be adding a new feature, but the version of that software is used for testing, and then it may or may not be merged into the main branch when it's done. So here, once again, merged, closed, merged. All right, and we have releases as well. So releases are a way to package a version of the software. So branches are different branches of the code. They're different. It is technically, I guess you could call it a version, but when it's actually released as a version, it goes into releases. And that could be a point release, a dot point release, or anything like that. We also have tags, and the tags here keep track of different features that you could do. So it makes it easy to find things through a quick search, to find things in the repo. So that's just a little overview of the Tailwind Traders website. And once again, you can check that out online. It's open source, and you can actually rebuild this whole thing. So let's go back to the slides. There we go. So features of GitHub project. I showed you a little demo already. So one other thing I want to cover is just how would you actually work with Microsoft Teams to make your, well, not just work with Microsoft Teams, but how would the Tailwind Traders actually collaborate to make their team more involved? I mentioned people, process, and products. So we've got the people. They need to be more involved in the process. And to do that, one of the products you use is Teams. So Microsoft Teams, for those of you in the pandemic world, are familiar with Zoom and other tools, including perhaps Teams. Teams is a way to do chat. You can do meetings. You can call.
Brian, yeah. Brian, Jeremy already covered that. So with limited time, maybe you can move past this. We already had a great talk on this.
Okay, all right. Well, I just wanted to give you a little recap of that. You can integrate GitHub with Teams. So there is an extension, you add it into the Teams, it's an application you add into Teams, and it provides things like if there's an issue that comes up in your repo and you have a chat that you're tracking for this related to this project, GitHub will tell you automatically in the team chat that there's a new issue or there's a new pull request or other things as well. There's been a commit that's been posted. So it's a great way to integrate and have more information shared so people don't have to remember to do that. So you can also use Visual Studio Code, which is a free open source text editor. It's written in Python. It runs on Mac, Windows, or Linux. It's extensible and customizable, and it's open source, and I mentioned it's free. I mentioned extensible too, so extensions are great. In fact, if you go to marketplace.visualstudio.com, you'll see all kinds of extensions for this. A bit of trivia, it is the most popular Go editor out there. Even though Go is more of a Google thing, it was created by them anyway. Visual Studio Code is used for Python, Go, all kinds of things. So it has language support. It also has tool support and connectivity. And an example of an extension that you can use is the Live Share extension pack. This allows you to do audio calls, chat, and collaborate on code. And I'm actually going to show you a demo of that right now. How are we doing for time? So, yeah, okay, cool. So this is just a real quick three-minute demo. This is a fork of the Tailwind Traders website that I showed you before. It's from Microsoft, but it's my fork, so it's in my Benz account. Then I make a clone and I put it in Visual Studio Code. And I want to use a GitHub action to deploy this out to a website. I've already got a GitHub action set up here, but I want to change it to a staging website so I can test things before I put them into production. So what I do is I actually change this to the staging website. I do a commit. Git commands are built into Visual Studio Code, so I can do a commit right in Visual Studio Code without having to go to the command line. I click that little checkbox, and it actually commits. And when it commits and I push that up to the repo, because it's a GitHub action, it actually triggers an action on the GitHub repo, these things called runners on GitHub that run the action. But in this case, it failed. The publish failed because I'm publishing to a new staging environment. And there seems to be something wrong with the Node.js that I'm using for this. There's a package that's incompatible with our staging environment. So what it does is it actually publishes and it tries to build the application in GitHub, and it won't deploy it if there's a failure. And that's what happens here. So then what I want to do is I can't figure this out. So I create what they call a collaboration session inside of Visual Studio Code. I copy an invitation, and then I ping my buddy Zach, and I talk to Zach and say, hey, Zach, do you want to help me work on this? I know you're a Node.js guru. I don't know where to fix this. So he comes into the collaboration session with the link I created and shared with him. And he is going, there he is. So Zach can actually edit my code, and I can just sit here and watch. It's great. And because he's an expert, he's going to go and he's going to say, okay, node 10, this should be node 10, not node 14. And there's a little bit of syntax that's obscure that has to be changed. And then when you go to publish when you go to actually commit this time, there's an automatic message that says this was co-authored by Zach. Now let's go back into the action. So I push this out to my repo again, and you can see right there on the top left, change to Node 10, co-authored by Zach. In this case, I've sped this up a little bit. Basically, it went through, it did the build okay, and it's deploying to the website now. So that all worked with the new node. And then once that's done, it'll actually open. You can go into the logs, you can find the URL, and there it is. So it's open and it's running. So that's cool. So I showed you, we had GitHub, I had a problem, I created a collaboration session in Visual Studio Code. Zach dialed in through Teams and he had a look at my code and was able to fix it, and then GitHub Actions deployed this out to the website. So let's recap that. So we needed to solve, a couple of things at Tailwind Traders. It's rapidly growing. There's not much collaboration, lack of shared tooling. So what did we do? We set up source control with GitHub. We created collaboration through Microsoft Teams. We shared code using shared tooling in Visual Studio Code. And that just creates a good foundation for a DevOps strategy. The people, process, and products. You get the people, everyone understands their role. The process supports the people, and the products support the people in the process. So there we go. So a little review. We went through what is DevOps, talked a little bit about source control and GitHub. Microsoft Teams covered that as a collaboration hub, and then showed you how to extend DevOps with Visual Studio Code and GitHub Actions as well. So some docs. If you go to Aka MS, all things DevOps, that gives you some info on DevOps in general, so DevOps theory, not necessarily specific to Microsoft. We also have, if you go to Getting Started DevOps, a overview, and this will lead you into a Learn module. This takes you to the AZ400 DevOps certification called Designing and Implementing Microsoft DevOps Solutions. So that's a good resource as well. And that's it. My name is Brian Benz, and Cloud Advocate at Microsoft. Find me on Twitter at bbenz, and we can wrap it up there.